Arriving back in Hawaii in 1972, 70, Dr. Kinzie expanded his invertebrate interests to include, to name a few, the physiology of symbiotic algae and coral, the ecology of Hawaiian aquatic ecosystems, which we'll hear about today, especially gobies, seaweeds in Waikiki, and the linkages and nutrient dynamics between streams and the ocean. This man leads by example and enjoys getting students excited about biology by crawling up precipitous streams to study native and alien species, as well as down into natural lakes such as Lake Kalahako on Molokai to take water samples. As one unique aspect of his teaching, the zoological component of this class for over a decade, Dr. Bob played perfectly chosen Hawaiian musical selections at the beginning of every lecture to provide a fuller sense of this special place for the students, you, in this course. Bob is a black belt and sensei of Aikido. He trains with CrossFit, and he can still be found crawling upstream. So join me in welcoming Dr. Bob Kinzie. Play you some music. No.
Okay, so now it's gonna start. But you gotta make it show them.
I'm sorry. Oh. Like that.
Okay, here we go. Or you could have sat in front. Okay, so for any place where there are living things, water is really, really important. If you're paying any attention to probes and exoplanets, one of the things people look for is water. If there's going to be life that's anything like ours, there has to be water. In Hawaii, water has another whole level of significance, a spiritual level, and this is just one of many statements about the connection between life and water and the importance of water to humans in Hawaii and to the whole natural world. And which button makes it move?
The right arrow.
Oh, to turn it on. That's so old-fashioned. Is it supposed to have a little thing in it? Because it doesn't. Well, we can just look at this all day and talk about the philosophy of water.
No, I think it's out of batteries.
Okay.
There's another battery in the case.
That ain't gonna work.
Isn't that deep?
That ain't gonna
In
work.
which case?
There's a battery.
Okay, well, let me go through what I'm going to say, and then we'll just look at the stuff as it comes up. So the first section is going to be a recap of stuff that you've already had when you've had people talking about climate, when you've had people talking about geology, when you've had people talking about how the islands are formed and how the islands are shaped. And you've had all that already, and you do remember it, right? So there was going to be a recap, which I'll be able to go through really fast now. And then I'm going to talk about a little bit about what's in the streams and then end up with some threats to Hawaiian streams. Okay, so you know all this stuff. We're dominated by, the climate is dominated by trade winds, although as climate change progresses, the trade winds are going to be less and less dominant. So there are big differences between the windward and the leeward sides of islands, which you all know about. You know about how mountains are built. You know what they're built out of. They're built out of basalt. You know that the presence of mountains in the trade wind area causes rain, and the rainfall patterns are determined by the direction of the winds and the position of the mountains. When that water falls, it does, of course, a bunch of things for living organisms, plants and animals and so on, but it also does a lot of things to the geology. It makes the channels that the streams flow in by erosion, and it carries that eroded material down to the ocean. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about windward versus leeward in terms of streams and stream channels, differences in elevation, the kind of flow when precipitation happens, what happens to that water as it lands on the ground. Okay, so this is rainfall falling on a paved situation, and I think it's pretty obvious that it's going to go into the lowest region. It falls across here, sheet flow, forms in this little sort of a temporary gutter, and that happens in man-made situations like this, but it also happens in natural situations. The water always flows to the lowest place and then congregates, aggregates there, and moves along, and as it moves, it does erosion. So here's a pasture, and you can see that this is all wet in here. There's sheet flow, surface flow across through the grass and so on. The ground is saturated here. It's probably been raining for a long time. The ground is saturated, the water can't sink in anymore, so it flows up. This isn't even a stream, this is just a low spot in the pasture. Okay, but when it hits a situation, whether it's rock or whether it's vegetated like this pasture, the moving water will cause erosion. And depending on what the underlying rock is like, the erosion will be very fast, very slow, take different forms. And these form the channels. They form the shape of the channel, the size of the channel, the nature of the channel, whether it's smooth, whether it's rough. Okay, so windward side of islands, has frequent rains, sometimes heavy rains, and importantly for us here, at all elevations. Okay, so this is the leeward side of an island, the windward side of an island, and you can see that there's no stream channels here, but obviously the water has collected into little temporary rivulets, and they're just coming straight down, and they're doing erosion work little by little and cutting back into this cliff face. Water can flow through vegetated areas. It can also flow through just bare rock areas and doing erosion as it moves. The water itself can erode, but also when the flows are heavier, it moves material, gravel and stuff, and that pounds away at the bottom, and that furthers the erosion. Okay, so this is an example of a high flow situation when a lot of this erosion takes place, and this is what the erosion looks like when the water's gone. So this is up above Hilo, and this is boiling pots, and you can see when the water is high, all of this unvegetated area is covered up with fast-moving water. Then these pools form here because of turbulence comes down and eats away at the rock. Okay, as streams erode the underlying material, they make the channel, whatever it is, whether it's a little teeny channel or a great big valley, they make it get wider and wider, and they also make it go deeper and deeper into the island. So deeper and deeper into the island, we call headward, which is not a relation of leadward, but it's a direction that the channel moves, but the channel also gets wider. So this is an example of a valley that's formed. This is the main stream, but you can see there's also streams now forming on the side, cutting back into the rock. And you can see they can cut pretty deeply. The stream almost disappears in some of these spots, and on that video, there were places where the stream had cut so far back it almost had disappeared. This is on the side of a valley, so the valley is also getting wider. And on the windward side, this happens at the same time. Valleys get wider and they get deeper. Did you guys have your field trip already in the bus, the geology field trip? Are you gonna?
Yeah, 10 days.
Oh, so you're gonna learn about these. These are called plamies, and these are triangular facets facing outward from a conical volcanic peak, and they're separated by radiating streams. So these flat areas are, in this picture, very useful for agriculture. They're the remnant. This is the original slope of the volcano. You can kind of make believe, or you can kind of imagine what it looked like. And then this is the erosion into it. So they're useful for agriculture, and you can see they're also important for housing. And you'll see this when you go on your field trip. These are the flat places where you can build houses. These are the steep places where you probably shouldn't build houses. Okay, and the result is big, big valleys like this. Okay, on the leeward side, most of the rain is up Mauka, and so most of the widening erosion is up at the Mauka end. And at the lower end, where there's less rainfall, the channel simply cuts down. Okay, whoops. So this is on Kauai, and you can see this is all pretty barren. It's not being eroded here by lots and lots of rainfall, but the stream is cutting down. So we have these situations in Hawaii that are called, you probably got this in your geology section, amphitheater-headed valleys, where the valley is fairly restricted, and then at the head, up in the rainy region, it's big and opened up. And Manoa Valley is a good example of an amphitheater-headed valley. It's actually wider at the back than it is at the front. Okay, so this is kind of a generalization, but on the leeward side, you tend to find V-shaped streams. So this is Makamaka Ole on Maui, and you can see it's eroding down, but it's not really getting much wider. And this is a windward stream. This is on Kauai, and it's more of a U shape because the stream is cutting down, but also erosion is opening the valley up. Okay, the streams, most of the streams actually make it to the ocean. And the place where a stream meets the ocean, the buliwai, can have very different kinds of aspects, very different situations. Okay. So it can flow across a boulder beach, like this, and these boulder berms open and close depending on stream flow and wave action. Like it can go across a sandy beach, where the place where the stream mouth is changes from day to day. It can go into the ocean as a waterfall, just going straight into the ocean. This turns out it's going to be important for the stream organisms, but you just need to be aware of the different kinds of stream openings. Here's a boulder berm with the stream kind of backed up behind it, and the next day we went back and you can see it's opened up and now the stream is going out. So these are very ephemeral structures. They come and go, come and go. Okay, and these are just examples of streams dumping straight into the ocean at low flow and at high flow. Okay, so that's that. Water in Hawaii is, as I said, it's physiologically important, it's agriculturally important, and spiritually important, but it's also politically important. The Constitutional Convention that redid the original state constitution put in a feature which is written up there, which you can read for yourself. But basically, in Hawaii, the state controls fresh water. Okay, a lot of states it's not like that. People can own water. They can sell it, buy it, and sell it, and so on. In Hawaii, said we own the water, and they got away with it. And they now have the responsibility to and the authority to take care of it. So one of the things that's important is the needs of, or the uses of in-stream flow. So we have in-stream flows, that's where the water stays in the stream, but there's also many situations where the water is taken out of the stream, and we'll see that in a couple of seconds. So these are the list of features. I think there's 9 of what the value of the in-stream flow is. And the states, the Constitution says that the state has the authority and responsibility to take care of this asset for the public good. Okay, and you can see the list of public goods there. I'm not going to bother. Okay, so if you're paying any attention, is everybody paying attention? There's 2 big cases going on right now, both on the island of Maui, one on East Maui and one on West Maui, about water use. And the State Water Commission, which is part of the Department of Land and Natural Resources, is involved with this. And basically what it has to do with in West Maui has to do with these 4 streams, Nawaiha. And these have been diverted for agricultural use since the early part, in the early part of the 20th century. And now that sugar agriculture is being closed down, people are saying this water that's being diverted maybe should be put back in the streams. So this went to court several times, and now most of these streams have water back in them. So this is an ongoing fight that's going on in West Maui. In East Maui, it's even more streams. I don't know if the number's up there, but there were, I think, 19 or 20 streams in question. It went to court again several times, went to the Water Commission, and the process of deciding how much water stays in the stream and how much water goes in the ditch to central Maui is still being decided. If any of you have ever driven to Hana, you know that alongside, in many places alongside the road, you see the ditch is right at road level. You can, stupid people get in inner tubes and die. But that water is collected from a whole series of streams in ditches like this and sent to central Maui. For agriculture, the county also uses the water, and some of that water is used in upcountry Maui. But it's a huge, huge system. It took years and years and years to build. So 24 miles of ditches, 50 miles of tunnels, and so on. Okay, so that's the end of the political part. Now I'm going to go into what's in the streams, the biological life. And I'm going to be talking about non-marine, because you've already had marine stuff, I guess. Aquatic, it's in the water. Macrofauna. So we'll talk about different habitat types, where the different kind of systems where these animals can live. But I want to define what I mean when I say macrofauna. So the macrofauna that we'll be talking about are the fishes and crustaceans and snails that have an amphidromous life cycle, which we'll get really into detail later. But basically, it means that they, right now, it means that they are supposed to stream in the ocean in their life history. They reproduce inland. The hatch larvae are carried out to sea. They develop in the sea. They return to a stream. They move upstream in some cases, and then the whole cycle gets again. When I use the term macrofauna, we leave out all the insects, and you know that the insects in Hawaii are just crazy diverse. And a lot of them are aquatic, but they don't have this life history pattern. Leaving out some snails, snails, including some endemic species, spend their whole life in freshwater. Microcrustaceans, because they're little, and so on. They're little because they're hard to work with. Okay, so different systems. Anchelan systems are found in nearshore areas, mix of fresh and salt water. Or you can read it, I don't have to read it to you. There are plenty of these on the Kona side of the Big Island. There are plenty of these in Maui. We have several of Anchelan pools on Oahu, and they have a biota that's specific to them. Oops. So this is an example of what this orangey stuff is, a crust that's made out of bacteria and algae, and it forms these almost geological organic mats. These things are pretty hard, and you can see that they're very extensive and very peculiar. The bacteria that are in them are unique, and people are just beginning to start to learn about these things. So this is on Kona side of Big Island, but they have similar pools in Maui. And who lives in these pools? There's actually a bunch of species. The folks at DAR just put out a little handbook of Anchelan fauna, and it lists all of them. These are the most common ones. The Opaiula, which is the one that you can buy in stores in these little everlasting pots. And you put them in there and they live for 10 million years. But there are other species. Metabateus is another fairly common one. Metabateus often eats Opaiula, but they eat other stuff and they just pick up stuff along the bottom. But there are, I think, 9 crustacean species that live in these ponds. People think that the ponds are the habitat, but we think that the actual habitat is in the rock. Did you guys have the cave talk already?
No.
Are you gonna have a cave talk? Oh, man. Well, I'm not gonna talk about caves, but as you know, that basalt is permeable to water. That water can go through all of the micro cracks, meso cracks in the basalt. And we think that that's the real habitat of these creatures. And where we can see them are in these ponds. And they come out in the ponds and they eat stuff and so on. But probably the bulk of the population is back in where we can't even get at it. So these ponds are more like windows. Okay, estuaries. You know what estuaries are. The estuaries are more common on the older islands just because they tend to be more flattened out near sea level. But there are estuaries on all islands. And they are urihated. They can have all kinds of different salinities. Okay, who's in there? A lot of these fishes you're familiar with. Ahole hole, ominu, barracuda, mullet, and so on. These fish occur there, can occur there as adults, but also a lot of these fish move into estuaries and even upstream of estuaries when they're juveniles, because people think, and there's pretty good evidence, that they're safe from marine predation there. Okay, they're invertebrates. We just did a survey yesterday in beautiful Makiki Stream. I didn't go in the water, but we did see the snail, which is amphibious, but we did see Samoan crabs, and we did see crabs. Okay, now we look at streams. This person is actually the father of that little person there, but not recently. Okay, so if you look in a stream in Hawaii, what do you see? What do you? Oh, this is looking in a stream too. I forgot to put this in. This is somebody. I think it's me counting fish in a stream. What do you see? This is what you see. So that doesn't seem too exciting. But if you look closely, or if somebody puts little arrows for you, you can see there's crustaceans and fish here. Not super big and super brilliant, but just in this one little, I just put my camera in the water and took a picture. There are several crustaceans and 2 or 3 fish in. Okay, so the Hawaiian freshwater macrofauna biota is basically has these characteristics. They are well, the next slide is going to show up, but what their ecological characteristics are, what their biogeography is, and then we're going to go through a list just showing you the different species. Okay, so how did things get started here? You know all this story, but the basic thing is for freshwater organisms and for terrestrial organisms, there wasn't any direct path. For marine organisms, you can imagine a green sea turtle someplace in the Pacific swimming to a brand new island, and it could be at home. Might not be much to eat on this day, but for organisms that are real freshwater organisms, crossing the ocean is very difficult. Okay, but it turns out that the dominant fishes, snails, and crustaceans are marine in origin. So the fishes are gobies, which are the same group as the freshwater, as the marine gobies that are all over the tide pools and intertidal rocks and so on. The snails are neritid snails that are related to, did I just do something? Oh, neritid snails that you see in the intertidal, and the crustaceans are basically estuarine organisms. Where do they come from? They all show strong Indo-Pacific connections. That is, the species I'm going to be talking about didn't evolve here into freshwater. They came from freshwater fishes and snails and shrimp someplace else in the Pacific. And then if they turn into a new species, that happened here. But when some people get the idea that these things were little marine gobies, and then all of a sudden they evolved into freshwater gobies here, and that didn't happen. It did happen in caves, which you won't hear about, but there were ordinary non-cave organisms here, which turned into cave organisms. Okay, some of the ones that aren't amphibious tend to be cosmopolitan. Did Sherwood talk already Okay, Dr. Shaw. So you know about the story about the algae, that everybody said the freshwater algae was all cosmopolitan, but the closer you look, the less true that is. So this is just a word people use. If somebody says this, it means I don't really know what I'm talking about. Okay, so we're just gonna move up the stream from the seashore up as high as we can get and see what we see. Okay, closest to the mouths of the streams, Eleotris. This is Oopu, Akupa. All of the fish are kind of have a genus name and a species name. This is a predatory fish that lives in very low stream mouths. It's not a goby, it's a gobioid, and I'll show you the difference in a second. The difference is that true gobies have this suction disc down here. Marine ones and freshwater ones have this suction disc. But this fish, those fins are not fused together. And so that means that it can't stick to rocks. Okay, another fish that's common in lower elevations is Gobies. This is Oopunaniha. This is very common on the, if you go on the windward side to any of the streams that go into the ocean, like Ka'ava stream or Kahana stream, and you're down where the water is running across the sand just before it goes in the ocean, you'll see these guys. They're actually probably more common on Oahu than on some of the other islands. Okay, this is Alaus staminius or Oopunakea. So this fish is the biggest of the species. Used to be, you were able to get them. I saw a record of one that was 30 centimeters. I'm not sure if I believe it, but they get good size. And people eat these, especially on Kauai. They have what people call spawning runs, which aren't really, but when the water gets really big in Hanalei River, you'll see all these guys on the stream bank with their poles out, and they're catching these big guys and girls as they go down or get moved downstream where they lay their eggs, which we'll talk about soon. Okay, moving a little bit further up is Siceopteris. These are grazers. The other Nakea is sort of a generalist, but this species is a grazer. They move along these algae-covered rocks, and they have a little upper jaw that comes out like a shark, and they go, and they scrape up algae. And you can see these are little light things, but they sometimes make little algal trails along here. Okay, so this is no pili. They call it no pili because it sticks really well. You find these sometimes in really, really fast water, and they were used as sort of a good luck thing for if somebody was like building a house. They would bring this as an offering so that good luck would stick to the house, like these fish can stick to the stream where the water's flowing really fast. The juveniles look really different than the adults. Moving further upstream, and I gotta say this isn't bong. There's a lot of overlap, but it's easier to talk about this one. Is Lantipes concolor. These are females. I want you to remember these little white dots. But look at the fish now. These are females. These are the males. The males, when they're defending their territory, get really, really beautiful. So they have this kind of fluorescent blue around the tail. Sometimes there's fluorescent blue on the front dorsal fin, and then this bright white second dorsal fin, and this red part back here can kind of flicker like there's a little red light inside that's going off and on. It's pretty incredible. And these guys will get on a spot and they'll go up there and do a display and try to attract females into their territory. Okay, for crustaceans, the endemic, by the way, all those fish species are now thought to be endemic. They didn't evolve into freshwater here. They all have relatives in the same genera, other places, but they evolved into separate species here. So maybe I have time to digress briefly. So this is something that you need to think about when you think about evolution on islands. So in the terrestrial situation, there were lots of examples you had of adaptive radiation. So think of the finches, think of a lot of the plant genera that came here. Some of the insect, the Drosophila, where many species evolved from one or very few immigrant species. In other situations, typically in the marine and also the freshwater, because these are essentially marine organisms, you don't find these adaptive radiations so much. So now people think maybe a couple of groups did speciate here. I think Opihi is thought to have speciated here. But a lot of species, a lot of endemic species are just, they came here from someplace else. They changed enough so that somebody called it a new species, and that was the end of it. They were just happy to be that way. We think that probably has to do with the connectivity in the aquatic situation, where isolating them is more difficult than imagine the tree snails, where to get from one valley to the next valley over is a big deal. Okay, so this is an endemic shrimp, the mountain shrimp. These are Opankala ole. They have a bunch of different names, actually. These are the ones that if you go to a real luau, you get to eat them. They're kind of interesting. They go along the bottom with their front legs like a lot of marine shrimp and pick and eat and pick and eat. But because they live in streams with unidirectional flow of water, they also filter feed. So on their front, they have 10 legs because they're decapods. The front set of legs has little bristles, so they can stand up like this and hold their little bristles up. So they look like, you know those things you swat mosquitoes with and zap them? It looks like that. It looks like they're holding mosquito zappers, right? And they're little bristles, and they catch plankton or material. Detritus is floating downstream. So when the velocity of the water gets above a certain level, they switch from being benthic particle feeders to being filter feeders. Okay, there's another native crustacean. This is Macrobrachium grandimanus. This species occurs many places in the Pacific. This is restricted to estuaries, mostly. And again, it's common on Oahu, again, Kahana, places like that. Okay, there's a group of gastropods that also have this life history. Neratina granosa, Neratina vespertina, and there's actually a couple of other species. These are the two common ones. And they live just like snails. They crawl around on the surface and scrape. If you ever had a snail in your aquarium, they go up to glass and they use that little, because they have a radula, and they scrape away and scrape away. And they feed like that. They tend to come out in the nighttime. If you see them in the daytime, it usually means there's just choke in that stream because all the hiding places are full. This guy up here that has these little white dots, these are egg capsules. So a lot of gastropods lay egg capsules, which are little containers that inside have lots and lots of eggs. So each one of these egg capsules has about 50 eggs in it, so you can imagine how small the eggs are. This guy is probably about this big across. So these are about the size of a grain of rice. So they lay them on each other, and you saw back in the picture of the female alamo'o that there were some little rice grains on the rock. That was what those were. These little things hatch out from the egg capsules. They get swept down to the ocean. They turn into trochophores. Dr. Hunter can tell you all about trochophores. Out in the ocean and then come back to the stream. Sometimes they come back to the streams by the gazillions, just pouring in these little black dots, just come pouring into the streams, and they form trails, and they follow each other's little mucus trail, and sometimes they get kind of weird. They kind of start following in a circle. They go around and around like that. But there could be so many in the stream that you can't put your foot down anywhere without killing hundreds. So you try not to put your foot down. These are not really that common on Oahu, but you can still find them. Okay, so this is sort of a recap. I sort of mentioned it. The life history pattern of these species. the main thing I want to talk about now is mating and egg laying, and then what happens to the larvae. So you can see the story. This is what the eggs look like. This is the eggs of Alamo'o, the tippies. So the females lay these egg masses on the bottom of rocks. So the male's sitting there with all his colors on. Come on, baby, come on, baby. And the female goes underneath there, turns upside down, lays the egg. He goes right behind her and fertilizes the egg. And then he chases her up and takes care of the eggs. Don't you wish life was like that? So the female's gone, and the male stays in there and tends the eggs, which mostly means keeping predators away and keeping sediment from collecting. Since they're upside down on the rock, sediment isn't that big a problem. The males wave their tail and keep the water flowing. So these are what the eggs look like. You can see these are very early. This is only 2-cell stage. This is probably a 4-cell stage. This thing here is the yolk sac, and they're attached to rocks by these little hairy filament things. Okay, so the eggs hatch out into very, very undeveloped, I call them larvae, but ichthyologists say these are called free embryos. Why are they not larvae? They don't have a mouth. This one has a mouth, but it's 14 days old. They don't have a mouth. They can't eat. They don't have an anus, which is, if you have a mouth and you don't have an anus, you have a problem. But these don't have a mouth or an anus, and you can see that they're living off their yolk sac. The different species are identifiable now. What happened was Dan Lindstrom, who took these pictures, took these larvae, which just look like little blobs with different color patterns, got the DNA from the larvae, got DNA from adults of the known species, and was able to match up which larva belongs to which species. So that was a big jump. The longest he was able to keep them in freshwater, or keep them in the aquarium, was about a week, 2 weeks. You can see this has a mouse now, but finding food small enough for these things to eat just was very difficult. So he never managed to raise them beyond that. Okay, after some period of time in the ocean, we've done some work on Alamo'o, which suggests they're out there for about 90 days. Some of the other species, Nakea, probably much longer than that. So typical reef gobies, which these are related to, are usually in the plankton for about a month. Sometimes 2 weeks, sometimes 4 weeks. So that's kind of a typical time for a marine goby to be in the planktonic phase. These are out there much longer. Why that is not really clear, but what it means is that it makes finding out what happens to them very, very difficult. But they come back to the ocean, come back from the ocean to the stream, and I'm sorry this is a pretty chunk picture. And they're about 12 to 14 millimeters long. And very quickly, after they get into fresh water, they change from being swimming up in the upper water eating plankton. They go to the bottom, their whole face changes. And if you could do this for Halloween, it would be really good. All the bones in their head kind of move around from a terminal mouth to a ventral mouth. And then they start scraping off the bottom, eating off the bottom. Okay, so one of the things is we know that some of the species are found above very high waterfalls. So this is Caca Fossum on Big Island. So we know that up above here, in fact, that picture of my son sticking his face in the water that I showed at the beginning of this, that picture is actually taken right up here. We tried to push him off, but he wouldn't let go. So how do these fish get up to these upstream habitats? Because remember, they're only about, well, this big to this big when they're recruiting. And that's a pretty serious climb, and that water is coming down pretty fast. Well, the mystery was solved one way a while back, but it turns out it's not actually that spectacular, although that would be really cool. What they do is they don't charge up the rushing water. They go up the side where it's wet, but where they can stick on. This is no peely, the one that's good at holding on. And you can see it's got, you can't see because it's stuck down, but its sucking disc is attached to the rock. And what they do, which is really fun to watch, is their mouths, remember, they're also these guys are scraper creepers. They take their mouth and they go, dunk, they suck onto the rock, and they take up their sucking disc and they go, dunk, and they go, dunk, 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 using their mouth and their suction disc. These are pretty good size. In a lot of places in Hawaii back in the day, and a lot of places in the world still today, there's a big fishery for these recruits. People build traps and they convince the fish to go into the traps by changing the stream flow and so on. And they get them in very, very large numbers. So in the Philippines, in Taiwan, in the Caribbean, and as I said, used to be here, there was a fishery for these guys. But no more. It's now illegal actually to catch them and recruit. Okay. So what are the threats? Can't have a talk in 450 without talking about threats, right? What are the threats to Hawaiian streams and their biota? These are the main ones. Dewaterment, taking the water out. So I talked about the Nawaiʻeha and East Maui stream dewaterment situations. A lot of those streams, Nawaiʻeha, is anybody here from Maui? So you know what Iao Stream, it's not Iao Stream anymore, but what used to be Iao Stream looks like when it goes through town. It's just in this big concrete ditch, right? Okay, and it's dry most of the time. So that stream was totally dewatered. Waikapu, which is the stream that goes across the isthmus of Maui into Kanaha Pond. Anyway, the one that's the bird refuge on South Shore is hardly ever has water in it because the water is taken out and sent in those ditch systems to central Maui. Channelization, which what you see in Iao Street, takes away the habitat. Even if there's water there, the habitat isn't very good, and then alien species. So this is an example of dewaterment. This is a dam. This water's up there. It's actually being led off to a hydropower plant over here. And there's water here because it seeps through the concrete, but this isn't a stream anymore. This is just water that seeps through the concrete. Okay, channelization. So this is beautiful Kava stream in my hometown in Kaneohe. A lot of streams, especially in urban areas, look like this. So there's water flowing, but there's really not much in the way of habitat. It gets hot because the water is exposed. It's very shallow. It's exposed to sunshine. It gets very hot. There's no place to hide, and there's not much to eat. Okay, this is the Iao Stream channel. So this is the stream. What they did in parts of it is they put a little low spot and put little pebbles in there and said, okay, this will be the fish habitat for the fish to get down to the ocean and then get back up. Because if you've ever been to the park up above, it's beautiful up there, right? Lots of water and so on. So the fish will just, they know, oh, we'll just crawl up here. Okay, it didn't work. It's great for skateboarding. But as far as fish passage went, it was a failure. Okay, and then another thing that happens is alien species, and you've heard about this in terms of plants and birds and insects and all kinds of things. The most obvious one, and the commonest one, is Macrobrachian lar. Sometimes it's called the Tahitian prawn. This was brought here in the 1950s for people to fish for. You can see it's in the same genus as the native prawn, Macrobrachian grandimanus, and it's also in the same genus as the aquaculture prawn, which is Macrobrachian rosenbergii. So there's actually 3 species of Macrobrachian in Hawaii. Grandimanus is the native that lives in estuaries. Rosenbergii pretty much is restricted to aquaculture situations. It doesn't seem to do very well on its own. But Macrobrachian lar occurs wherever the dam pleases. It's aggressive, it's big, and it's amphibious, so it gets around. It was brought here in, I think, the early 1950s, and in 15 years it was in every stream in the state. So that just is an example of how great the dispersal power of these marine larvae of these amphibious species is. it's disruptive, it walks around, it can occur at really high densities. So it's a very big ecological disruptor in the system. Okay, another one that's more recent is this, if you go into a pet store and you say, oh, I want to buy feeder shrimp to feed your fish, this is what they sell you. And these are not native, they're not amphibious, but people, you know, so you buy some of these shrimp to feed your fish, and then the fish aren't hungry, and you got these leftover shrimp. So what do you do with them? You put them in the stream by your yard, right? That's the obvious thing you do with them. And that's what happens. So a lot of streams now, so people come to me and they say, oh, I found opie in Monroe Stream, oh, it's so great. They're coming back, and they bring me these things. They're in the same group, different genus, but in the same group as opie, but they're not. Okay, and they're very abundant now. Okay, lots and lots of poison fish, guppies, mollies, swordtails, mosquito fish. With dengue fever, the State Department of Health goes around and puts mosquito fish in every piece of water they can find, and then DAR goes out and pulls mosquito fish out of every place that the Department of Health has put them. But it keeps them busy, so that's okay. Other kinds of things you find in freshwater, some are, we don't know what their effect is. These guys have a huge effect. They're from Central and South America. They live in muddy areas. The Manoa Stream is full of them. And they burrow in and make little cavities in the soft bottom, and they erode the sides of the streams really, really badly. So people try to grow taro hate these things because they make a mess. Okay, so just to think about, when you think about freshwater, take care of it. We need it. The fish need it. The crustaceans need it. The plants need it. Everybody needs it. So take care of the water and take care of the stream habitats and the little guys that live in it. Thank you.